Our lighting tech.
Yeah, right. Just moving the curtain. High-tech lighting.
Hello.
You've now witnessed the height of my technical understanding. Move the curtain. Lovely.
So all you need to know is what to do at the right time, isn't it? So, so hello and welcome to How to Connect with Humans, which is our new series of talks. And this is our tribute to Sydney Banks, whose teachings really change our lives and help us go through things we could imagine that we could go through, and also completely change our lives and made us not only have a better life for ourselves, but also help other people, which is an incredible gift. And I know, I have Wayne here, who we wouldn't be doing this without you, and it's absolutely amazing. Who's also trying to do the tech at the same time. But we are starting, especially because we have two amazing people here that said yes to start with. They were like, would you give a talk with us? Yeah, it was just like, it took about that amount of time for them to decide on that. And then we thought what we could talk about. And then fresh relationships was the first thing that sort of came to our minds. So without further ado, we would like to introduce you to Chip and Jan Chipman. They are the amazing friends, amazing teachers, and they're wonderful speakers. They go all around the world teaching this understanding, and they were originally the ones that heard it also from Sydney Bank himself, and they have Vantage Consultations as their company, and so they talk to groups, and they have talked in prisons, and they have talked to, you name it. They have done amazing work, and you have absolutely changed lives without words, truly.
Absolutely.
So do you think that's enough introduction?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So hello.
Hello.
And thank you so much, Carolina and Wayne, for setting this up. This is so beautiful. Just to
for sure
to be here with you both and everyone here. It's just so wonderful. It's people we haven't seen for so long. Some new faces.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we said yes quickly to Carolina and Wayne because as we get on in our age here in our work, I guess I would say that the people that I want to work with the most are the people who have the feeling, right? Who live in that feeling and share from that feeling. So there's no question with these two that we wanted to work with them. It's like, that's what's the most important to us, because we know that we just know from experience now that people who teach from that feeling, who share from that feeling, are the ones that impact people the deepest. So it's an honor to work with them. It's an honor to be with all of you. This is an amazing collection of people who are doing wonderful things. So glad to be here.
Amazing. So what we would like to do is just, we're going to have a conversation about what we feel, how we sort of go around our lives and relationships, and what we feel makes them fresher, and sort of get curious with each other on what we would like to ask. And we look at Chip and Jan and we think, oh, they never for sure have something to say about each other that they don't agree. Oh, we're sure about that. There's never a moment where like Jan will look at Chip and go like, oh, he's been so annoying today. Really not. So are you human beings like the rest?
How come you didn't say, but Chip
Yeah, really.
looking at me that way?
Yeah, really. Of course, we have our moments for sure, As time goes on, less and less. I mean, that's important to say too. But we definitely have our moments, when we don't see eye to eye. It's interesting. Somebody asked me about this, and a client that I was talking to the other day asked me really the same thing. And what occurred to me was not to talk about the specifics of it, but that as time goes by, when those moments occur, when we're not seeing eye to eye, it's like many years ago, I would have had the very same thoughts, that I could have those very same thoughts now, but there's something different about having those thoughts now. Like back in the day, I thought it was real, so we'd have to get into it. We'd have to be upset with each other for a period of time or whatever, or discuss it, And now it's like, they say that that it's not about experience, but I think there is something to experience. Like over time, we've learned it's going to pass. And we've learned that it's just thought. And I've learned for me that when I'm in that, it's just what my head thinks of Jan. I'm not really seeing Jan, right? I'm just seeing what I think of Jan in that particular moment. So as time has gone by, it's easier just to let it pass, just to, we're human beings, we have our ups and downs, and we know it's going to pass. We know it's a passing phenomena, put it that way, And there's something about that even when you're in it, and you're in that thinking, and you've had a moment or two, there's something about knowing that. It's akin to faith, it's a sort of a faith that you know what the true reality is, right? You're temporarily out of it, but you still know what the real reality is. And there's something so peaceful and comforting about that. You just, okay, and if a little while later, a few minutes later, it's gone. And, through this whole experience of being home together all this time, which is not a whole lot different for us because, we do visit people during so-called normal times and go into the village and that sort of thing and go shopping. So we have had more time together. But what's surprising me in this last couple of months, once again, is that in that quiet, I realized I really don't know Jan. We've been together for 51 years and I don't know her. And that's because when I'm in that quieter state and we're just enjoying ourselves together, there's always a surprise because she's learning and growing and changing. And I think that's probably true. We've all probably experienced that in the last little while. You get a different look at somebody you think and I know we do know each other on a personality level and everything, but there's something special about seeing that newness. And in my feeling, like I really feel I do feel for the people that have suffered more through all of this, and it's important to note that and have compassion for that. But there's been some beauty come out of it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's some deeper understanding that's come out of that quiet. And in our relationship, it's shown up that way.
But there's definitely what I'd love to share with people is that there's definitely a correlation for me between how often I slip into the old habit of being irritated, by someone else's behavior, whether it's Chip's or someone who writes me an email. It's like human behavior. When I first heard Sid, I was just at the whim of everyone else's behavior. I thought my happiness was dependent on how other people treated me and, or, circumstances. So the big insight was the freedom all of a sudden to have an insight that who I really am is before this reality. There's something that's comes before this reality and my own behavior or anyone else's behavior. And so when I heard that, I know that was because I heard truth. And so then I went back to my regular life, and that very day, all of a sudden, Chip's behavior towards me didn't affect my happiness. And then I watched as, that Chip started to get the understanding and for himself and realize that anything about me or anyone else couldn't really affect him. And so now I see that when I really make my priority, like when I get up in the morning, my priority is I want to know about my true self. I kind of hold off on what's going on out there in the world. And I saw a big change a few years ago when I made up my mind to pay attention to that, like wanting to know what's going on inside before I started to let in what's going on in the world. And so when I really pay attention to that and I start my day with wanting to get to know my true self, like give myself some quiet time to just really see the priority, see where life is really being created. And I'm still a human being and I still have a lot of thinking going on, but it's just that choice of saying truth is inside. I know Sid talked about that. He maybe even made a recording of that, but it lies inside. It doesn't lie out there. And so that's like this grounding that when I start my day, I see the correlation between when I'm giving myself that precious quiet and that discovering myself, that it reflects back to me. So I don't have to think about, oh, I'm not going to let that bother me, what Chip said, or did, or someone else said. It's just automatic. I'm in that beautiful feeling. And so some days I will get upset by other people's behavior, but it gives me that, and like this spiritual environment of peace and understanding, so that when those occasions come up that used to trigger me to get upset, there's something deeper going on. And so there really is, for me, there's definitely a correlation of when I'm really listening and giving myself that ability to get to know my true self and how I relate out there. And it's, to me, that's such a gift that, they talk about free will. That's my free will saying, I prefer to have that peace and quiet, even though it's not always there like any other human being, but there's more of it when I make that choice to get to know that spiritual side of life. And how fortunate we are, all of us, to have such a amazing opportunity to have that a guide, like, because I see Sid as a guide who really, behind his name and the personal self, is our own true self. It's not really another person, it's what's behind his words. And that isn't really coming from him, it's coming from inside of us. So how lucky we are to have that.
Boy, I love the way you said that, spiritual environment. I've never thought about it. It's a really good way to put it.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We had a little visit with these guys before we got started, and we're talking about what we might talk about or whatever. Not much, really. Uh, and like I just love the feeling that was coming from them. So you guys have really, you know that other people have suffered and all that, but you've really enjoyed this time together, haven't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think at some points there's been times where I've kind of thought, oh, I should be more productive and things like that. But then there's other times where I'm just like, you know what, just enjoy being in the garden with each other and just seeing the beauty and just doing nothing.
Has incredibly increased the beauty and a lot of things, and as we're discussing, like, this is not obviously disregarding the things that were happening in the world, and obviously people have had really difficult times, but suddenly we couldn't cut the grass, so the garden started growing whatever the garden wanted, and we never left it like that. So I looked over my shoulder and go like, oh, we've got coriander. We never knew.
Oh, nice.
And things like that.
And more strawberry plants that we thought there were there. And the dandelions were like growing. We're just like, oh, what a beautiful color of... Which before it was like, oh, let's do weed. Let's just take all these things out, And now it's just like, well, it doesn't matter. Let's just let it grow, And at some point, eventually, we'll just... But because we also wanted more green and a bit more of that feel of, being in nature, it made sense. And
yeah, I think I said to you about getting a gardener in to fix it, and you were like, no, it's fine, we'll leave it. And one thing you said to me was that, oh, the cats enjoy it.
Oh,
right.
yeah. The cats love it. It's like being in the jungle. They're up to here.
Yeah. It's like we were sitting having breakfast in the garden this morning, and you said, oh, look at the cats. And I said, where? And I was anything. And then, because they were camouflaged themselves, and I was just like, that is so beautiful. Just, it's just incredible just to see when we truly kind of just get out of the way of ourselves, how beautiful everything is. As I said a minute ago, I've been wondering, oh, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And I've just let go. And even with us too, I've just kind of think, oh, a relationship should be like this, a relationship should be like that. And now it's just enjoying the time we have together.
Wow.
I mean, no limits on it, no expectations.
Yet, like a few days ago, we nearly killed each other over deciding what thumbnails was going on the recording we need to present this. It was, but as you are saying, like, we get out of it so much quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make a big thing about it, or we just raise a red flag very quickly. Like, it was 2:30 in the morning, and one can say, look, it's late, we're tired, we it's too much, it's been too much, we've done a lot, maybe we have a look at it tomorrow. Like, we ended up that call like barking at each other, and I was like, this is all, we're not doing anything, what are we going to talk about? Fresh relationships, we have nothing to talk about it. And and the next day, like 2 seconds later, Wade was like, I'm really sorry, and we're like, okay.
I think what I saw there was the fact that although we did bark at each other, afterwards I could just sit there and just reflect why. And what I saw was the fact that I just wanted everything to be perfect. But at the same time, we were kind of just having cross wires of what we each other wanted. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to bed and we'll sort it out tomorrow. But then at the same time, it was like, I really want to get it done though. I really want to get it done. But I just said to Caroline, I said, what do you want out of it? What do you want? And I think the vision that I had to hers was different, but it was just the fact that it was late, we were both tired, we just could not express what we wanted. And then when we finished barking at each other, I just reflected and just like, you know what, it doesn't matter what I want, something beautiful will come out of this. And I truly believe that. And it was just what you've created in the space of 2 weeks.
Well,
is
it
just
was with you.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, you had this vision, you had an idea in your head what you wanted to portray, and it's incredible.
What is really beautiful as well is that it doesn't stick.
No.
It doesn't last.
No.
I won't be able to go back in a week or 2 or 3 months or 3 years and go back. Do you remember that day when we were trying to do and you didn't do what I wanted? I won't remember. This is one of the incredible beauties of, I think of this. It's just, you don't hold to grudges as in a way as you would have done before, because it doesn't make sense. It's not even something we do in purpose. It just happens. I don't have, and we don't usually bark at each other really. It's like it was a very one-off thing. Like we
if I could remember, I'd probably count on one hand how many times we have barked at each other, because it's really not that many. And as you said, it doesn't stick. That's the most incredible thing for me. This is probably the first relationship I've ever had that I'm not trying to win at anything. I'm not trying to win at an argument. And I'm not holding a grudge, or I'm not kind of trying to take an argument into the next day. As soon as that argument's done, I want to leave it and forget about it. A new day is a new page in our relationship.
That's really neat. That's like I'm sitting here thinking, I'm listening to people who know the value and the power of living in the now. That whatever happened in the past, even if it was 5 minutes ago, is irrelevant to who and what we are and how we feel. And that living in the past or futurizing, is we're learning. We're all seeing that living in the now is where the goodies are. There's nothing to be learned from the past, really. There are no deep answers in the past. That when we live in the now, we see what's really in front of us. That's when I was talking about seeing Jan different. That's really what I mean, is that when we live in the now and we drop the past and we stop trying to figure out the future, right? We see in the moment. And what you see in the now is always more beautiful than what we see otherwise, right? And that's what I'm hearing listening to you guys, is that we now know this body of people around the world who more and more know the power, the value, and the beauty of living in the now and how to get there, how to be there more of the time. Obviously, not all the time. It's certainly not all the time for me, but it's enough of the time to know that it's the real world. It's enough of the time to realize it's more valuable than being in the past or the future. And this whole COVID thing is just a demonstration of that. I'm like everybody else. I got worried about my kids and my grandkids, and I had that in my head. And then watching the news and thinking some people are not being smart about this and so on and so forth. And then I was listening to an old recording of Sid's when this all first started. And I was listening to that recording, and he came to this part where he said, when he talked about the world, the outside world, and he said, don't give it any energy. Don't give that world out there any energy. He doesn't mean don't stay informed, right? Or I like to know sort of what's going on, but it just really hit me when I heard him say, don't give it any energy. And then this morning, it ties together. This morning I was reading in Quest of the Pearl, the second book in that series from Hawaii. And there's a part where he says I think it might have been the first time he used this phrase, and he used it many times after, about that life is a contact sport, right? And COVID is definitely an example of the fact that life is a contact sport. But his follow-on line in the book, and I'm just paraphrasing, but was something like, great athletes know that they're going to have injuries, but they know how to avoid unnecessary injuries. And for us, the unnecessary injuries is in here, in thought, in our moments of being hard on ourselves or judging others. And that just really hit me this morning, that we are going to go through things in this life. There's no getting around it. It really is a contact sport. But we know, by knowing how to look inside and be in the now and be present in the moment, we know how to avoid the unnecessary injuries, right? We know how to go through what we're going through now and actually see beauty and have compassion for people that are suffering more, but we know how to avoid those unnecessary injuries. And it made me smile when I read that this morning. I thought, that's right, And it's been interesting talking to clients all over the world for the last little bit, because I keep expecting, especially some people I know were struggling maybe a month or so ago in terms of their thinking and stuff. But I'm so touched to see how well everybody's doing. People growing and changing and feeling good.
Well, what I see is the same. We were saying with Carolina and Wayne earlier that there's definitely been an impact on how many people are out there with an understanding of the principles, because everyone we've talked to, and we've been on quite a few webinars and been in touch with a lot of people
around the world. Yeah,
it kind of surprised me at first. I thought, well, is it just us that are feeling that there's been so many gifts that have come to us, in spite of the things that are going on, that these gifts just keep coming. But what I think is that I'm seeing more of the beauty, and that's part of the gift of the principles, is that when you really hear that the fact that there's this true self where there's absolutely no negativity. There's no negativity in the true self. And so if that is who we really are, and I believe that, I don't know it completely, but I believe it. And I've watched that over my life, that how that's brought actual change, positive change in my life in so many ways that are tangible. But below the tangible, that beautiful true self, which we're all the same. It's not my true self and your true self. That essence of life. That the more I let myself and give myself opportunities to slip into that and to make that my world, instead of just being seduced by the news and the negativity out there and other people's behavior. It's so seductive, right? But the more I'm learning to just see that there is this the true world is inside. I really believe that. So what hits me is it opens not just your physical eyes, like you can see the beauty. You can actually, I feel like I see it more. Like in the garden, it just looks more beautiful all the time. Chip looks more beautiful than me all the time. But that's the gift, is it's that simple, that you get to see a different reality than your physical senses are presenting to you. You see beyond, like, because that's what happens to me if I'm reading something profound and I slip into that beautiful feeling. What really hits me is that all of a sudden I look around and the world looks so different. I see things that I wasn't seeing before. It's just, and I know everybody here has experienced that, and that shift, that what you're looking at the world as you remember it and as you've gotten used to, and then boom, it shifts and you see beauty. Like that little shift, like that's like part of the missing link, is that shift. And that gift of seeing is, that to me, that's what the true gift of the principles, because then you don't have to intellectually figure out how to deal with behavior, how things work in our personal self. It's like you've slipped behind the scenes, and then it takes care of everything. Like we didn't have to go back and look at how we were being with each other when we first heard something. We were all of a sudden immersed in a new world where we were just in awe of how much beauty there was around us that we hadn't been seeing. So we were never talking about how we were together, our behavior. In fact, in the early 70s or in the mid 70s, when we first heard this, that was the thing to do, was make sure you talk about your issues.
Oh, yeah.
And so all of a sudden somebody comes along and tells us, no, don't talk about things, because once you start talking about things, unless there's things that you really, there's comes a time when maybe something is very important that you do have to talk about it. But just the basic, just letting things go, and just being in the feeling together, and watch what happens. Well, what we saw happen was things got fixed.
Yeah.
That we had been working on and working on and working on. We stopped working on, and they were fixed.
A client asked me the other day about how our relationship changed in the beginning, our marriage, because most of you know us and some of you don't, but our marriage was almost over when we first met, Sid. It was really a mess. I was really a mess. And I guess Jan would say the same thing. And so he was asking me, well, once you came across Sid and the principles, how did things change? And I said, I have no idea. I don't remember saying, oh, okay, I'm going to not do this anymore. And hopefully Jan won't do that anymore. And we won't talk, nothing. It just changed. It just changed. And the person said, well, I'd like to understand what you actually did. I said, well, I wish I could tell you. I said, I'll tell you this. And some of you have heard this, but, I was very resistant when we first came across the principles. Jan met Sid before I did. And then it was Jan's sustained change that finally made me curious. Like before that, I just I don't want to know about this. It's too simplistic, You have to work hard to find anything. But her sustained change finally got my attention. Like, well, wait a minute. I've not seen this before. I've never seen. I thought her change was, to be honest, when it first happened, was phony, that it was made up, that it was some kind of a silly euphoria that would go away. And the fact is, it never did. And after a few weeks, I went, oh, there's something here, and I started listening to Jan, and I had a couple of experiences of listening to Sid. I still wasn't a happy person, but I was listening, and still trying to kind of figure out our relationship. And then I've told this story before, but I'm telling it for a reason right now that has to do with now. I was sitting on the couch one day after I'd heard Sid talk a couple of times in the early morning, and Jan was on the floor playing with our son, who was maybe 4 at the time, 3 or 4, right? And it was really early, and so the light was coming into the window at a very steep angle and was shining in their hair, and it caught my attention, and I looked over at them, and this feeling just rushed in, this amazing feeling. And I welled up, and I was just filled with a feeling I hadn't experienced, maybe never, I don't know. And I just remember where this thought came from, I don't know, but in that feeling, I thought to myself, all I have to do is surrender. There's nothing to fix here. And because it was perfect in that moment. Now, I didn't fully understand what happened in that moment till a long time after. And then I came to see that was my first really deep experience of seeing. Of seeing in this case, my wife and son, without the filter of my thinking, without the past, I saw them. Right? And because I saw them, I knew that everything was okay. I knew we were going to be okay. So we fast forward like 45 years from that experience, something like that anyway. And when I talk about seeing Jan now, I'm still talking about that very same first insight. It's still speaking to me. It's still speaking to us. And all of us, our first insight will literally continue to teach us throughout our entire lives, right? And so that first experience of seeing is still speaking to me. I know that's the real world, you know. I know that's why our marriage changed. I know that's why our relationship changed. I know that's why I changed, right? Because I saw in that moment. And that really is the beauty of Sid's work. He's speaking, whether it's one of the recordings, the audios, the videos, the books. He's speaking from that place where that's the truth, where that's the true reality, right? And so when I listen in the morning, it's the same as Jan was saying. It's true I'm listening to Sid Banks, but I'm not really. I'm just listening. And I'm listening for that feeling where I slip in and I go back to seeing the true world, right? And there's something about this period now being home that I've started to see again the power and the value of that first experience of seeing, you know, and knowing, how did I know that was the true world? There's only one way I could have known. It's the same way we all know. The only way you can recognize it is that you already know it. You know? And in this quiet time right now, I just feel like we're getting a deeper reminder of that spiritual fact. So anyway, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. So we said that we'd leave some time for
With Carolina.
Oh, Carolina, you were going to say something? Please.
No, I was just sighing. Just like such a beautiful. I mean, I feel that if we unmuted everybody, we probably will feel an amazing feeling that if we're all in one room together, I'm sure that the feeling is absolutely gorgeous at the moment. So I'm thinking, would you like people to ask some questions so they can ask questions to you, to us, to, so yeah, should we, we'll open it up.
Questions or any insights or observations?
Yeah.
So much that I can relate to.
Yeah.
And all I can say is that before I heard my insight that the world and other people aren't causing my unhappiness, that it's in my hands, and that I have the capacity for so much more joy than I thought I did. So before that, my mind was so busy. We were searching, for something spiritual, and we were reading all the books and everything, but it was intellectual, and we weren't getting the feeling. And so when I was in that world, before I started listening to my true self and quietening down in my head, I was always in an argument with either Chip or somebody else, and I was really unhappy. So then I have an insight because I hear someone talking from this amazing wisdom, that absolute pure truth. And I go back to my life, and all of a sudden, I'm not picking fights or being bothered. Like at the beginning, it was like everybody's experienced the honeymoon period where you first hear the principles. And so everything was so beautiful. Life was just so beautiful to me. And then I would, got back into some of our old habits of getting annoyed and everything, but what other people's behavior. But I'd seen something. I'd seen that when I opened up to hearing something from inside, from the truth inside me, then I knew there was a truth inside me. And then the outer world changed and my behavior changed, and it looked like other people's behavior was changing. And so now, that's why I was saying I see the correlation that when I pay attention to helping my mind stay quieter, and that the way I do it, I nip it in the bud in the morning, give myself that time. And before I get caught up in the outside world, and that has a direct correlation to how much I get caught up in those little arguments or being bothered by people and, the world, or worrying about what's going on out in the world. So all I can say is, like, for me, the more I keep listening and paying attention to my own happiness, it goes across the board. Our relationship is just a part of it, because when you hear something and you go deeper, your whole world changes, and a nice relationship is just part of it. It's just part of it, because it's changing everything in your world. And I love the fact that what you said about, at the end of the day, you just let it go. Like, that's such a huge gift that you can do that, because I bet you remember times when you couldn't do that. Your understanding is going deeper, and all those little things, like the contact sport part of life, it can never really hurt you like it can hurt you. And your life will just keep getting more beautiful.
Complete transparency, okay? We seldom have to talk about anything once we've had a little moment or two. And when it passes, sometimes you'll also notice, oh, I want to be more careful about that with so-and-so. I mean, it's not that you don't learn from it, And for us, we seldom have to talk about it, but sometimes, not so much now, but a few years ago, or even, not that long ago, sometimes I'll just give you an actual example, okay? I grew up in a really big family, like I'm the oldest of 11 kids, right? So I don't know where this habit came from, but sometimes when we were with people in the past, and I would be a little bit socially insecure, I would speak over Jan or not give her a chance to really express herself. And it was just an insecurity on my part. And that used to be a big deal between us. But I remember a time when we did talk about it, but we waited. We had the common sense to wait till we were both in a really good mood. And I said, and we just had a little chat, and it just helped my awareness just to, when I'm feeling a little bit lower, to be careful not to do that. So it's not that you don't talk, but we've definitely learned there's almost no use in talking when we're in a bad mood about it, when we're not feeling good about it. But we do find times when we can talk about a specific thing when we're both in a good space. And it seems easy then to see what to bring out of it, what to change or whatever. I just wanted to put that little piece in there.
We're so lucky, because it's all the difference of living at the mercy of everything around you, which we'll never be able to control, or just be able to just sit back. Like when you said that about something you said made me remember that I used to get so much have more anger. And so I'd be things that Chip did, they might not make me angry, but they make me irritated. And now I see things as funny that I used to, that night, I don't know, I think, oh, is that so sweet or something. Before it was like, oh, it would just set me off, but it just hit me yesterday that if you return your anger into humor, and you see the funny part of it, that's so beautiful. And I'm so glad when all of a sudden I start chuckling at something that I used to be so serious about.
Although I'm getting a complex, about my wife laughing at me.
Oh, I don't laugh in front of you. It's more like inside chuckling.
Yeah, right.
My inner chuckle. actually read a little something of Sid or listen to something of Sid, because to me it's the purest form of my true self talking to me. That's what I hear, like because it's so pure that I don't get caught up in any kind of like psychological analyzing or anything. And I love the stories. I love the stories that Sid wrote, where you get caught up in the story, and he was so good at getting you into the story, and in the meantime you're hearing something because you feel so relaxed and it's so interesting, and it kind of puts your busy mind to sleep. And so that's what I'm getting out of it when I read or listen to Sid. It's that simple, because what occurred to me was when our life first really made a complete turnaround was when I heard that purest form of the principles when Sid was talking. And then when we got to know him, and he would talk in the community once in a while, that he'd come and talk, or he started doing a bit of writing in the early days. And that was like the most my mind was ever quiet. So I thought, well, if that is what works for me, then that's what works for me. Now, for someone else, it might be something different, but it's basically giving myself some time to sit down. I sit in the living room in my favorite spot, and before I've checked email or turned on the TV, I usually have my cup of tea. And just before I get thoughts about life and that day in my head. So that's basically it.
Same for me. I never was a morning person in my life. I have to be honest. I'm like, I gotta get up. But in the last few winters, I've discovered, and with Jan, I've discovered getting up, putting a little fire in the fireplace, fixing my coffee, and then sitting down and listening to a recording or reading a bit, for the same reasons, just to go to that place before the day gets going, And I know this is a little hard to explain, but I'm really not listening to Sid. I am, of course. I'm listening to the space and the feeling that he's speaking from, because it takes me inside myself. Not always, but a lot of the time it takes me inside of myself. And it changes the day. It just really, it's a good setup. When Jan used that word, the spiritual environment, that just something really caught at me when she said that today. And Jan is really good about taking care of that spiritual environment first before the so-called real world. But, it's really cool. The more we do that, the more we have that quiet, the more the real world begins to look like what it really is, because there is no real world. It's all spiritual, When I look at the world and I see it that way, I see that it's just this life is an amazing spiritual experience. Like lately, it's been really striking me that we worry about all our little stuff. It's perfectly normal. We're human. We have our thoughts about what's important and what's not. But every once in a while, I just get that feeling that when we think about consciousness, we think about what we do with thought. We think about what we do with consciousness. But every once in a while, I just get a chill when I remember that consciousness alone, just being conscious, is a moment-to-moment miracle. We're sitting in the middle of a moment-to-moment miracle, And when we see that, we feel this feeling of gratitude, And as soon as we feel the feeling of gratitude, we have happiness. You either have the feeling of gratitude or some feeling of desire, one or the other. And so that time in the morning, I think, is beautiful. I really love the way Jan put that to take care of our spiritual environment, And if we do it well enough, we've come to see that we're always in a spiritual environment. This whole life is a spiritual environment. And I can't think of anything that would be better than that myself.
Well, Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm trying to see if there are any other people.
Any other
to
questions?
ask any other questions? But something that I heard, and it reminded me of how much I've been giving myself a hard time about unconditional love. That with my dad when he was alive, with Wayne, or like people that I thought, well, I'm supposed to have unconditional love. And then I realized that unconditional love is natural setting with all human beings. It's always available for me. And it becomes conditional at any point I make up any thinking about how the other person is supposed to behave or do things, or how I'm supposed to be together, or how I perceive them in a certain way. And so I think I love this because it just reminded me that is helping me have patience with myself when I don't feel that unconditional love. But knowing that it is there, I can tap into that. I may have my preferences, but I could tap into that with any human being. Like if I can really find that place and that connection, and because I think there's a lot of pressure on relationships and couples, and whether it's with your children, with your, people are probably living at the moment 24/7 in some places without going out with the children, with their partners, with being afraid of what's going on with their parents, not being able to see them, or all this, and then getting irritated because, like, say my generation, like, they're supposed to stay home and they want to go out, like parents say, and like, why they're doing that, and I shouldn't be annoyed, and then people are with 3, 4, 5 children, like jumping around them, and so whether you have that moment to like listen to see it or read, but it's always available, and I think that's the most beautiful thing that I have learned from you, and obviously you bring in Seats teachings and all his recordings and works, and so thank you so much for that reminder.
Not getting caught up in the other person's drama, but still having compassion, you just being happy. I mean, I can't it just still amazes me how real that is, because when I first heard something, that's what I heard, is all you have to do is take care of your own happiness and not try and not be affected so much by everything around you. And as I said, that doesn't mean that you're not compassionate, and you'll know when somebody needs a hug or maybe some words of help or something.
Yeah.
But just being there and being loving to that person, no matter what they're acting like. Show people what everybody wants, how to be happy. Just that's like the big message in how to share the principles is you live it, and that's how it spreads. Something alone, and trust that they'll be okay, and not let it. Like we can find every excuse to not have that peace and quiet in our head, or that feeling of joy. Like for me, it just hit me. I could be worried about everybody in the world right now, and I care about people suffering, but again, if everything went away and everything was okay in the world again, and everyone is healthy, then I know I'll find some other thing, a little or big. And so it's just like all of a sudden you catch on, like there's no ever reason for us to separate from our joy. And we can still be, as I said, we can still be compassionate, but you can learn more and more that there is a choice to have that peace and quiet and happiness, and that is the gift. That's the most loving thing to share with someone, is you living in that state. That's the most loving thing you can do, no matter how much you see that you want to take them out of their suffering. That is the way.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very beginning, I remember Sid would say this thing. We first met him and things started to change. But there was this little thing he would say about you don't really have a problem. You don't really have problems. And something in me would say, well, but I wanted to go to him and say, well, but Sid, there's these concrete things that are going on in my life that, that's real. But I didn't do that. I trusted that. Well, I guess I've got to learn that. And over the years, I look back and I think these things that seem like insurmountable issues, that now I look back and think, well, that totally fixed itself, like things that were really big and concrete, and they all fixed themselves. To know that even though it's on one level, the problem is there, but the deeper we go and trust in that deeper world and go back into our true self, they don't become problems, or they don't stay as problems. And when we don't see them as insurmountable, then they're not. They end up fixing themselves.
The other day, I set out to straighten somebody up. One of our family members, that are not getting along well. There's two of them. And I set out, I was going to get on the phone and say, you need to forgive. And they said, hello. I ended up I know something that this person is really interested in, like just in life, just no big deal. And instead of saying, you need to forgive your so-and-so, I said, how are you doing with blah, blah, blah? Oh, did you see this? And I could, as I talked to him, I could feel his health coming back. And we weren't talking about anything. We were talking about a hobby. And then if I had said, you need to forgive your, that it wasn't going to help. That was like, it's just your thinking, I don't know. I'm throwing that in because I just had that experience of feeling like I needed to help a couple of people get along. Yeah. And that was phone. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna.
Well, all you have to do is if the shoe's on the other foot,
Yeah, really.
like I still have people that I haven't forgiven over the years of certain things, but that there's something wrong with me because I don't, think of them automatically with this beautiful feeling. I can still remember events. I just let it go because you can't force forgiveness. You can't. It's just like you say, Susie. So that you already had, I know that you already knew, and I'm glad that we were able to talk about this, because I know everybody, it's something that we all go through, and I do too. So it's really beautiful that you made it something that we can all learn from. It's just wonderful to be together.
I've enjoyed this so much.
Well, we can always do another one. No pressure.
Well, I know in some form or another we keep meeting up, where however it is we keep. So that's beautiful. Yeah.
We have such a beautiful group of people here, like absolutely amazing.
Yes.
I'm so thankful, honestly, that you are here. And anything you would like to say? No. So I don't know if there are any more questions. I don't know if Chip and Jan need to go. They've been incredibly.
Well, if there's another question, we can.
Yeah, sure. We could take one more.
Yeah, is there another one around there? It's the first part. I hope it is recorded. It is recorded. It is, yeah. So yeah, we're gonna share it. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Anything else you would like to know? You would like to Share.
I have these, I joke with people because I get my insights when I'm in the kitchen. And one day I was doing the washing up and I realized that I rush through it because if Chip is in the living room and watching something on TV, he usually cooks dinner and then I wash up. So he might be in there. And so one day I was realizing I'm doing it quickly and I'm not really present because I'm thinking I'm going to get this done so I can go do the next thing, like go and watch TV in the living room. And all of a sudden it hit me, if I just enjoyed while I'm doing it, instead of being in my head's already in the next thing, always that we have this tendency that we're rushing through something, or me anyway, to get on to the next thing. And that day it hit me, just see what this moment is bringing. You know, it's something that we do every day, several times a day. And so we become familiar with it. But then what hit me, I know what it was too, that when I was a little child, the biggest thing in the world would be if you had like a little kitchen that was, you know, like a fake kitchen. But then if it had real running water, be like, you know, so thrilled. So I thought, well, when you're a little kid, you think everything is so much fun. And I thought, and that's beautiful to be back in that state of mind, that it's not something you're rushing through to get on to the next thing. Like everything you're doing has that beauty in it. So that was the story and the insight.
I'll just talk about it in broad terms, and maybe you'll have your own insights about it.
Sure.
We all have people in our lives like that, and we're no exception, you know. But one of the great gifts of the principles is, as our minds get quieter, judgment falls away, and we have that gift of being in the present. And one of the things I know for sure about being in the present is you begin to see psychological innocence. In other words, you begin to see that people are lost in their own worlds, you know. It doesn't mean there's not a beautiful soul in there somewhere. So the big example in my life was my father, and his behavior was pretty bad at times. Growing up, I was the oldest of 11 kids. My father was a very angry, violent guy, you know, and for years I carried a really bad feeling. I mean, that's an understatement. You know, I literally had a hatred, you know. And then not long after we experienced a change in our lives and came across Sid and were learning, I remember one of the things that would disturb me when I first would hear Sid speak, he started talking about forgiveness, and it would just upset me, you know, because I literally would think, you haven't seen what I've seen. You have no right to talk to me about forgiveness. And one night when he was talking, I literally got up and walked to the back of the room and then outside. And he actually called me the next day and said, "Are you okay?" You know, and I told him, you know, when you talk about forgiveness, I can't go there, you know. And I said to him, I understand intellectually why you say that if you want a quieter mind, obviously there's a lot of thought around not forgiving. He said, "Yeah, that's true." But he invited me over, and it was one of maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times in all the years I knew Sid where he listened to the specifics of one of my problems, right? So I told him like the worst couple of stories I could possibly imagine. And I could see that it affected him, you know, because it was about hurt and violence and everything, right? And then we were quiet, and I thought, finally he understands. And he looked at me and he said, "Chip, your father must have really been suffering to have done them." And it just freaked me out. It just upset me that he said that, right? So I went home, and I'll try and make this quick because I know we're running out of time, but I think that night or the next night, I was laying in bed and Jan was asleep, and I started to think of some really mean and cruel things I'd said to Jan before our change. And I felt that, that feeling like, oh, if I could only go back in time and take that back, right? And I was just feeling terrible. And I've been, up until then, my life had been wonderful. And it's an amazing experience. As I laid there feeling terrible about what I'd said, I suddenly had this experience of, this is my best way of describing it. I remember thinking, those thoughts belong in this world over here, and you don't live there anymore, and they're not part of the world that you're in now, so let it go. And I remember this feeling of peace just literally washed over me. And I slept for like 10 or 11 hours, which I never did. And I knew I felt different in the morning, but I couldn't exactly see why. I think it was maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, I was in the same situation. I was laying in bed. Jan was asleep, and I started to think of my last fight with my father, which was not a very good thing. It was terrible. And as I thought about it, I started to feel physically sick. And the strangest thought occurred to me. It's like my head was really busy with all the resentment and everything, and then it just went quiet. And I remember thinking, my father was living in a world that was handed to him. He didn't even know that there was any world outside of that, right? And I just happened to be born in his house, or to his house. And I remember just this peace come over me. And the next thing for me, and I know this is much more extreme, but in what your example, but the next thing that happened is I felt this feeling of compassion and love for my father, which I hadn't felt for my whole life, really. And going forward, we got in touch with him, and we actually started. I hadn't spoken to him for about 12 years. And I started to talk to him. Mostly it wasn't that great. He didn't really want to talk about anything important. And he was really confused as to why Jan and I would call, right? After all we've been through. But eventually I had the experience of talking to him when he thought he was dying. And he had an insight, and he changed, Now, the fact that happened is not the important part of what I'm sharing with you. It's that in seeing his psychological innocence, I was able to let go of how I felt about it. I just saw that innocence, and it allowed me to have a feeling of love for him in spite of what happened through the years, in spite of what I had felt so bad about, And it set me free. It gave me a profound level of freedom, and it stayed with me. My dad's gone quite a few years now, but I don't have any bad feelings about it. So I was lucky that my dad did change. That was amazing. But I also know that wouldn't have been necessary for what happened for me. That I saw his innocence. And there's something lovely about that, because you see, we all get lost in whatever worlds we live in. That nobody escapes this planet without having gone through some degree of that in some way. And as you get quieter and you listen more, I suspect one day you're going to really see your dad's innocence. Right? And that will change how you feel in this life.
And Chip, I saw Chip started taking more care of himself.
Yeah.
And when you take care of yourself, other people's behavior doesn't bother you. I'm sure you've noticed that there's times when the behavior bothers you more than other times. Yeah. So the principle of that is taking care of yourself in every way, looking after your own happiness. That gives you the ability to be around other behavior and not have it affect you.
And there's a flip side to it too. Like, I know that the ability to eventually connect with my father had a lot to do with how I started showing up after I saw his innocence.
Mm-hmm.
I was solid. I wasn't afraid. I was happy regardless of what he was doing or saying. And I know that had an effect. I know that we wouldn't have had the conversation we eventually had I not seen that innocence which changed how I showed up when I talked to him and when I was with him. Anyway.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Very perfect question to ask right now, because I'm sure
Thank you.
Beautiful job, absolutely.
definitely.
Thank you so much. You've been incredibly generous with your time,
Yes,
and
thank you.
and thank you everybody for staying this long. We're going to create a group so people can keep in touch and also see what's coming, and so we can. So we'll generate the group, and then we'll invite you, or just look for it. It will be how to connect with humans. And so to let you know, next week at the same time, we're going to have Dickon Bettinger, which we probably all agree it's an absolute treat, and we're so happy. And I have to say, if it wasn't because Jan and Chip said yes, then we were saying, like, suddenly we felt like we have these superpowers that we could actually go play and ask anybody else. So the next person we thought was like, should we ask Dickon? And we're like, children, just like, everything is possible. So it's an absolute treat. We actually have now 10 episodes, so we can't believe it, with great speakers, on which some of the people that are here on the call are in there. It's going to be an amazing ride. Thank you for starting us on this one,
Thank you.
Jan and Chip.
It's been a pleasure.
Absolute
Really
pleasure and honor.
so wonderful to see, even though we didn't get to talk to everybody, seeing all your faces,
That's really nice.
so special to us. Yes.
Jan and Chip, where can people find you if they would like to connect with you directly?
VantageConsult.com.
Yeah,
You can reach us there.
and you could write to, if you want.
It's our address.
Oh, right. Our addresses are there for our email.
Yeah.
Feel free.
That's easiest probably.
Yeah. So we'll put the details underneath this event, so you can contact them if you want to. And we're always here for you to contact us as well. And I hope this has been helpful. And we'll put the recording so you can share it and you can watch it as many times as you want. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
There's nothing I ever dreamed that Wayne will say, no way. And that's an incredible thing to have. So thank you so much for being here.
And thanks for all your beautiful comments too.
Thank you.
Lots of love, everybody.
Lots of love, and we'll see you soon.